Entrepreneurship can be really hard, and when you're doing it by yourself, trying to navigate the terrain, it can almost be impossible. That's why we created the Entrepreneur Circle. Every episode, you're going to hear from incredible entrepreneurs who are in the same trenches that you are in. And we're going to talk through what's working, what's not working, whether it be in marketing, finance, or anything in between. We're here to talk business and figure out how each of us can rise together. So welcome to the circle. Let's dig in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Entrepreneur Circle. I am so stoked for today's episode. I have the one and only Taylor Leary here with us today. He is the owner of 4 Points Wealth Management, and he started 4 Points 5 years ago, but has been in the game for 16 years now, I believe. Yeah. He was working with a huge wealth management company for about 10 years. And then he branched off and decided to launch his own firm. And since then, he has been managing hundreds of households, helping them level up their financial security, reach mindful wealth, and really attach the two together as far as how do we live a fulfilling life and make smart financial decisions and kind of make our money work for us. And I'm so excited you're here, Taylor, because I think there's a lens to this when we talk about financials for entrepreneurs specifically. I know for myself, when I left corporate America about 6 years ago, I had to really work hard to detach from that employee mindset. Right. You know, you have a 401k at your job, you have, a steady income coming in every week, you get that paycheck or every other week. There's a big bridge that you have to cross as an entrepreneur, or as you're walking into entrepreneurship when it comes to your money mindsets. Yep. So I think that'd be a great place to start if you want to jump into it. What do you think are the key factors or the key differentiators between an employee mindset when it comes to finances versus an entrepreneur's mindset when it comes to finances?
Really good question, and I'm really excited to join you on your podcast and be able to give some insights. And so when it came to my experience transitioning from being an employee to being the owner of the business, there were a few things that personally shifted. And then on top of that, I have kind of the cool opportunity to see other people go through the same journey. And for me personally, it was really understanding what goes into building a business. And there, that might seem obvious, but I always think about like little k no versus uppercase no. Meaning like, yeah, I know about it intellectually, but you don't actually know until you're in it, like you're feeling it. And I think about you have children, I have three kids, and you can read all the books in the world. And then you have your child and you're like, what does this look like? Like, how do I change the diaper? When do I know this thing needs to get fed? Like, how do you keep this thing alive? Like, and you just learn on the job. Yeah. And so my experience was really similar, where I intellectually loved like listening to the books, the podcasts, the videos, and just being a part of like the entrepreneurial community. And at times I kind of felt like a little bit of a fraud because I myself wasn't an entrepreneur because I was still a W-2 employee within a larger organization. Now, you could call it like entrepreneur, like I was still building my business within this thing, but in the end, there were some safeguards, there were some things that I wasn't making decisions. And so that's the first thing, is the decision making that you have to do. And for me, one of the biggest aspects or the biggest helpers was planning it out. That's kind of my nature anyway, is being able to build a plan. And then what was nice is then I could go back to that plan when things got weird. So I made the leap to build my own company. I left my old firm, and I had to be kind of quick about it. I had to be on top of my game because this was a time where you're talking to clients, you're talking to people, and all of a sudden you're having to have your what's your story? You've got to have your where's your office? What are the tools that you're going to use? Because from my perspective, when I moved firms and built my own firm, people wanted to know that they had stability, that they weren't taking a risk to be working with you. So that was something that was maybe unique about the financial services space, but I could see that with a lot of entrepreneurs is that, they take that leap and they're, the client base that they had before might see that as a risk. And actually in some ways it worked in the opposite direction. People were coming to me now because I was doing my own thing. and that they didn't want to be attached to another firm, or they thought it was really cool that I was doing this thing over here. And they said, yeah, like we've been watching you for years. We're so excited for you now. And then they started working with me. So there was definitely some cool experiences there. So I would say the planning piece was big because that allowed me to make the transition well and do it with this idea that I had a roadmap in front of me. And I talk with my clients about this all the time within their financial roadmap, like what does it look like? Because there are going to be challenges along the way. And if you have something to lean back on, then you can go back to that and you don't have to make these decisions for the first time. And if there is a decision that you have to make, maybe it's a little bit of an alternative to what you wanted, but at least you've put some thought into it. And that at least you have some sort of an end game in mind so you can start to take those steps. Another thing that I made a big transition when I went from the employee to the entrepreneur is really understanding all the things, the details, right? So you've got this plan, you've got this little k no versus uppercase no, but like now you're thinking about marketing. And those decisions are on you. How do I run my finances? And what it did is actually gave me a lot more empathy for the former owner of my firm. And he, in some of the challenges that I watched him go through when I thought the answer was so simple. And in reality, it maybe was somewhat simple, but there was probably much more complexity from his perspective. And there was some challenges that I saw him face. And now when I was in my situation, I was like, oh, I kind of see what he's saying. That running a business is not the most easy thing. And there's things like, within doing payroll and doing all these things that you're like, oh, I didn't know I need to have this insurance. I didn't know I need to have this, or, this software costs X dollars. Well, now you actually see what that really, what kind of impact that is. And then there's other things that go to it, like, cash flow management, building out spreadsheets that model this stuff out. And you can do that all day from the standpoint of planning, but then you put it into work and now you get a surprise expense, and that can throw things off. So that was a big jump, is just the mindset shift from going from that employee piece where a lot of the stuff was taken care of to now being an entrepreneur, and now all of those things that are in your business you're making decisions on. Right. So that was a big change, and I think something that was I was prepared for it to a certain degree, but I don't think you can ever be fully prepared for it.
Right. I think there's so much to be said in walking that bridge to get from one side to the other. Because it is a lot of pressure. It is a lot of stress. There is a lot of complexities that go into decision making. I wonder, one big piece of it, when you're looking from a just consumer standpoint, right? I want to go invest my money. I have this cash flow to pay for my expenses, like my groceries, my mortgage, etc. And then I have this much to go invest. Would it be wise for businesses to adopt a similar mindset where they have their steady cash flow, but then they have some of their reserves, for example, sitting somewhere? Should they just have it in their savings, their business savings, or do you think it's wise to go invest as a business?
So I think my view of this is that when you go through a transition, again, this is kind of regardless of business, divorce, getting married, having a child, there's a whole host of different life events. But using this example of starting a business, I don't think you should be making major financial decisions outside of that business. Meaning, taking that money, let's say you have, you make, the leap of faith, as they call it, and you now have the business plan built, now you got to go get some clients. Well, having that reserve of cash over here, and then knowing what the finances are, you've got your personal finances, you've got your business finances, having liquidity, as we call it, which is basically cash on the sidelines to be able to, to access at any given moment, is going to be one of the smartest things. In fact, I'm just working with a client right now who's going through this very similar experience. She was an executive with a healthcare firm or healthcare organization, and she was feeling the stresses and strains of corporate life. And she saw an opportunity to start her own business, and she's made that leap. And one of the things that she's been building up, and this is something that we've talked a lot, is build up your cash reserves, right? Because you just don't know. Especially for a lot of entrepreneurs, they're not starting day one with revenue. And so this gives her what I call a runway. So now she knows what that runway looks like. let's say it's $70,000 to $100,000. Now she knows that she's got 6 to 12 months of personal financial assets or liquidity to be able to maybe weather a storm. Maybe the thing that she wanted to sell wasn't exactly the thing the marketplace wanted. What if that service doesn't do exactly what you had hoped?
Right.
And all of a sudden you're reeling because you have no idea what's next. So that's a big thing for me, is not making these big investments or big decisions, and making sure that you've got sort of a war chest, so to speak, to have on the sidelines. And then once you see stability, now let's start having that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're working with a fiduciary advisor, they should be having these conversations with you.
Right.
Hey, yeah, don't invest that stuff. We don't know what the market's going to do day to day if you're looking at an investment, but maybe having that cash in the sidelines probably is going to be a little bit more helpful if things get ugly.
Right. See, I feel like when you look at it from a personal finance side,
Yep.
people have their trusted financial advisor. You're our trusted financial advisor. And I think there's so much in that you help guide us in. Then there's a gap when you look at entrepreneurship. There's a gap in small business and medium to big business, where medium to big business has a CFO or a fractional CFO that comes in and helps with budgeting and how do we spend the money wisely, where is it going, etc. That gap, when you're too small to hire a CFO and you're not even really able to get a fractional CFO, I would say that having a financial advisor kind of in your corner that has that business expertise is probably a wise move, right? Do you see that in your industry? Are there a lot of financial advisors that pour into businesses like that?
Yeah, I think that that's a huge aspect. And this is what my role is to sometimes be the quarterback for those business owners. It's to say, yes, I can help you or at least guide you in the right direction, meaning we can have a conversation, an intellectual conversation about your options. And for me, that's one of the biggest compliments that I get from my clients when they say, Taylor, I've got this situation. Can you help me think about it in the right way? And then if we need to make some steps, what professionals do we need to bring on?
Right.
Is there a tax expert that we can go talk to? Is there a business attorney that we need to talk to? Is there an estate planning attorney? So knowing kind of that piece where I have my network of really trusted advisors can help my clients gauge what is the most important next step as far as those financial professionals. And I say financial professionals from, again, the business attorneys, those people that can have huge impacts on your overall financial life and can help you direct your business in the right direction. In today's day and age, the beauty is that we just have access to a lot of this other stuff. Like, we think about virtual assistants. 15, 20 years ago, a virtual assistant wasn't what it is today. I mean, you can hire a virtual assistant here in the United States or even abroad, and you can do like the 4-hour work week type of thing and outsource a lot of that stuff. But inside your own business, I've found that there are, with technology and some of the other things, we've been able to outsource some of the hard stuff or the stuff that's not very fun to take advantage of. So yes, I am working with my clients to help somewhat streamline a lot of that stuff. Just the other day, I have a client that's selling his insurance business. And it's going to be, the succession situation, and his cost basis or how much he put into the business is almost nothing, right? He kind of bootstrapped it. He built it from the, what it is today, and his cost basis is zero basically. So any gain that he has on that business is going to be a significant gain, significant,
Yeah.
7 figures. And so how do you structure the sale of that business so you're not paying $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in taxes?
Right.
Now, yeah, you get long-term capital gains and you can do certain things, but should you be structuring as an installment sale, a deferred sales trust? There's a whole host of things, and that's to say, is that exactly what he needs to do? No, not really. But is he better equipped today now that he knows that information? 100%. And so my job is to bring some of those options to the table, educate him on what that looks like, and then him to say, okay, we've got 3 or 4 options in front of us. What makes the most sense? And then we start the process of looking at, business attorney, tax professionals, somebody that can be in that specific space. So now he's not going and wasting his money or time going to these various professionals and them, either causing a big, tax bill, or not tax bill, but, just professional bill of like, oh, I spent all this time on it because I haven't thought about it.
Right.
Now he gets to spend some time with me, think about it, go through the process. So that's been a really cool thing from my perspective.
Well, and that's, I feel like, the goal, right? Any entrepreneur gets into this because we see the potential. There's no limit in what we can create, right? I think there's a fine line between paying ourselves now, right, as the owner, while we're also meeting payroll and all the other things that we're rocking. Paying ourselves, but then also building wealth for the future. Mm-hmm. I think there's that cash flow that we pay as our income, and then there's the personal wealth building side of this as well as an entrepreneur. So tell me how you think founders can balance paying themselves today with building wealth for tomorrow.
Yeah, really good and a great segue, because this is something that I'm in the middle of. I started 4 Points Wealth in 2020, so in the middle of a massive financial crisis.
I bet that was fun.
Yeah, it was fun, but it worked out. There's some caveats to why that was the best time of any. And when that, since that time, since 2020 and now, I hadn't been contributing to a retirement plan. And so even in the back of my own mind, I'm thinking, well, am I doing it right?
Yeah.
And really the reality is that our financial future isn't necessarily built on a retirement plan, or maybe our financial security isn't necessarily built on an IRA or a 401k. There are some other things that you can do. However, so for me, I was reinvesting a lot of my money back into the business. So learning through, you specifically, like marketing, putting a lot more effort and energy into that, and financial resources. And guess what? That was kind of at the detriment of my personal saving. Okay, but those things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Maybe something takes a little bit of a back seat at certain times, but just in the last quarter, I've now introduced a 401k to my business. So now I'm contributing as a business owner. So I'm an S corp. So I am an employee, and also now we do a match. So now I'm matching, and that's a benefit to both the employee, me, and my employees, as well as to the business, because now it's a business expense, the matching program.
Right.
And so now there's this kind of nice little balance. So from that perspective, you can kind of do both. You can do it from a business standpoint where you're building, goodwill and all of those things with your employees, but at the same time, you are building your own wealth, right? And then you have to kind of think about it from, how do you plan this? So you building out your cash flows, looking at your retained earnings. What is that? How much does your business need to have? So there's some things that happen on the personal front and on the business front that are really similar. So they make a connection to each other. So it's just because and we can look at, corporate finance, you could look at, all of the different accounting stuff that you might have done in college. And while you might be talking about a business, just replace that with Leary LLC.
Right.
Or Noble LLC. And then you're like, oh my gosh. So Josh brings in this, Paresa brings in this, these are our expenses, these are our investments that we have that are generating income. And then all of a sudden, if you start to think about your household as its own business entity, then you can make other decisions. And so there's some really cool things that we kind of connect with business owners to say, you keep good books, right? Well, yeah, of course we do. Oh, you do a cash flow budget? Yeah. Well, guess what? You should probably be doing that yourself. Right? And they're like, well, no, I don't need a budget. And you're like, well, no, you do. Like, we do. Did you forecast your cash flow this month? Well, of course I did. Did you do that with you and your wife? No. Like, and I'm usually talking to men about this because they're like, oh yeah. Whereas women happen to be typically more risk aware.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, did that, done that. No worries, we're good. And so I always laugh because it's usually the men that are like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm just gonna shoot from the hip on the personal side, but I'm gonna have my everything dialed in on my business side. And there's like some sort of a disconnect there. So
I'm sure there's a mindset of it will overflow and we'll just be fine.
Exactly.
It'll be fine.
This trickle down effect, like, it's fine. Like we're all, but this is the reality. Is I was working with a business owner just recently, and he's been really successful in his business recently. And he started it about 18, 20, 24 months ago, and it takes a lot of capital to do what he's doing. And what it was, he was buying and selling properties and doing some stuff like that and putting a lot of money into this. And it was his personal wealth. And so we were going through this whole thing of like, well, how does that, yes, you've been successful, but don't let your hubris take control, which is his overconfidence in the things, because he's had early success. How can you mitigate some of the risk? And so we're talking about potential, and then through this, it's attracted other people. Hey, I want to be a part of that. How do I be a part of that? And he's fielding these questions. And so we're talking about potentially building like a small private fund. Okay, well, how does that mitigate his risk? So now there's some things that are really interesting inside that conversation where he can actually generate income from the fund, let's just say. He can have his personal wealth in the fund. He doesn't necessarily have it all like he is right now, because if one project blows up, it's an ugly scene, sure. Right? But if he's got his money in there and he's a part of the fund, and you structure it as a limited partnership where you've got a GP and an LP, and these are things that we don't necessarily need to get to today. But by doing that, he can structure it where he's actually mitigating risk for himself and not missing out on the upside.
Okay, this is a big thing.
Okay.
This takes me to a question around tax planning.
Okay.
Because I look at entrepreneurs, and I gotta say I'm guilty of this in my early years as well, of I don't want to pay taxes, and if I just run everything through my business,
yep.
My home Wi-Fi, my cell phone, XYZ,
yeah.
and I don't necessarily show a huge profit, then I don't have to pay taxes,
yep.
but I'm still getting that lifestyle,
yep.
right?
Right.
That's a dangerous game to play for many reasons.
Oh my gosh, yeah. This is, yeah.
So let's dig into this.
Where do we start? So let me just give you some insights on my history. So my mom was a banker.
Okay.
We lived in a small town in northwest Colorado, Steamboat Springs, and my mom, being a community president of the bank, knew a lot of things about a lot of people, right? And worked with a lot of business owners. And she was very good about not sharing names, but she gave me a lot of insights on how things go. And this was always with the trades, specifically with the trades. I don't know what it was about that. Plumbers, carpenters, electricians, those types of folks. Is they would say, yeah, last year I made $300,000. And they need a business loan, or they need a home loan, or they need a line of credit or something like that. And they pulled the tax return, and they made $25,000. And she's like, okay, so I have to tell my underwriters like a story. Mm-hmm. You told me you made $300,000. I'm seeing that you made $25,000.
Right.
Share with me the discrepancy. Well, I've got a truck that I'd use this, and then I work out of my garage, so I write off my mortgage and this, and then the thing starts unwinding, right? So you realize that he's actually not claiming very much income at all. So from a personal perspective, this gives you a lot of exposure to, I wouldn't say tax fraud, but tax liability if the IRS were to audit you. So that's one of the things from a risk standpoint. Another thing that you look at, and this is something something I've seen for years, going back to 2009, is I would sit down with somebody that's in their 60s and say, you're an electrician, great. How much did you typically make on an annual basis? Oh, about $200,000. All right, great. We pull up his Social Security benefit, and it's $800 a month. Now, to put that in perspective, somebody that had making $200,000 a year on a regular basis should be essentially maxing out their Social Security benefit. So it should have been closer to $3,000, even potentially $4,000, especially in today's world. Wow. So you look at it, you're like $800 versus $3,000 or $3,500. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right.
And then it unwinds, and we find out that he's only been telling the IRS that he's been making, $50,000 a year. And so that has a huge impact, because if he hasn't been saving, so Social Security being, Warren Buffett has access to Social Security. The guy that, doesn't have anything has Social Security for the most part.
Right.
And it's a safety net, right? But to that end, if you're not telling the IRS what you should or have been making in a reasonable and respectable way, well, maybe those benefits aren't going to be there for you. And it's usually those guys and those people that are going to be the first to say, that I'm getting screwed by the government.
Right.
Well, that's one side. Now, the other factor that you're kind of talking about is, just making sure that you're kind of piecing the business and your personal life keeping those things separate, because we talk about the IRS, like that's obviously a concern that you've got to have. But for the most part, most small businesses, if they're filing their taxes, aren't going to be audited. However, what you then do is you expose your personal and your business to liability. So if something were to happen to you within your business, and let's say you're commingling assets between your business and your checking account, your personal checking account, well, now all of a sudden, those two things seem to be one and the same, or at least the court of law might see it that way. And now you get into this ugly situation where that limited liability corporation, or LLC, that you started doesn't have much limited liability because you brought in your personal liability. So now all of a sudden you're in a little bit of a funky situation.
Right.
So making sure that you're going through those extra steps to be able to write yourself a check to, from your business account to your personal account. That's fine. But don't use your personal account for business expenses.
Right.
Unless you're going to do a reimbursement on the other side. And then just, these are kind of the books and this and that. So you got to be really careful about how you're structuring it from that standpoint, because there is certainly a risk. Now, so then we start to look at a whole host of things, but there's some very cool things. This is what I love about the tax code. So people look at the tax code as something to be feared. Okay? Taxes, it's the 4-letter word, right? IRS 4-letter word, right? And and we're seeing this right now as Trump's dismantling some of the things that happened under the Biden administration, and you see a lot of conservatives cheering from the sidelines, which is fine or whatever. It doesn't really matter. My point of that is, like, taxes are a lot of times people's worst nightmare.
Right.
But what if you flipped it on its head? And something that changed for me about 4 or 5 years ago is I read this really interesting book through the Rich Dad Poor Dad group, and it helped me change my perspective on taxes. Instead of looking at the tax code through the lens of it's bad, look at it through the lens of what does the IRS or what does the government want me to invest in? And you start to think about that and you go, oh, okay, well, let's look at real estate as an example. Now, in my world, in my industry, there's a little bit of dissonance between real estate and wealth management. And it's probably because the realtors or the real estate professionals of the world have seen that as being a great asset, and they think your money should go there.
Right.
And the financial advisors who have kind of been the investment advisors think about the stock market as the best place to invest. And now they're at loggerheads because they look at the world through a lens of scarcity. Money's either here or here, not here.
Right.
They don't come together. And so for me, let's look at real estate for what it is. An excellent benefit for taxes. So I'm working with a client right now, and she has an Airbnb. And we're talking about some of the things, and she went in and upgraded the Airbnb, and she's using it, all these things. And so we're looking at it from depreciation, and then she's getting some good revenue off of it. And she's like, what's my tax bill going to be? Well, I can't really tell her that exact answer, but we can start to look at it and say, okay, depreciation, do this, and then your income is this, and roughly your tax liability or your net revenue or net income from that is going to be X. Right. And I thought that was really good because she was like, oh, well, I kind of knew that, but I didn't really understand how that all plays out. The other thing that you look at from the revenue, the IRS code, is being a business owner. Oh my gosh, look at that. That's a huge deal. Don't be afraid of that, because guess what? If you're building businesses, our capitalist economy loves that.
Right.
We love that. We were essentially built on that. And that makes us one of the best games in the world.
Right.
Right? People in the United States aren't fearful that our government is going to steal our business. Now, some people might sit there and that's so far-fetched.
Yeah.
Like, there are governments out there that if they don't like you,
they just take it.
they're just going to take it, or whatever, and turn it over to the government, and that's a very real concern. Guess what? In the United States, we don't have that, and I don't want to be political here, but it's the reality of like where we are. Is we have like such an intrepid landscape of opportunity that if we just opened our eyes and saw this, I think most people would take better control of themselves.
Right.
And we hear this from people that are first generation Americans. It's like, gosh, you guys have it so easy. And it's amazing. I mean, and when I say easy, to start a business is not easy. But guess what? We have the option to do that. So when you look at the tax code, think about where we should be investing and how we should be investing. Another thing they benefit is long-term investing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like retirement,
Like
essentially?
retirement, but also just investing in like the market.
Oh,
Short-term capital gains go onto your ordinary income typically. Well, that's not very advantageous. But guess what? If you hold something for a long time, your tax bill goes down on that same gain. So you look at it through that lens. So it's ways to think about it that you can save yourself money. And there's two ways to think about it. I hate taxes, or I'm okay with paying taxes because the more money I make, the more taxes I pay.
Right.
And there's a limit. Like, there's a level that I think it's reasonable and fair to pay taxes. But nobody wants to pay more than their fair share. And I think that that's a totally reasonable place to be. Mm-hmm. So we try to talk with our clients through that, and then we work with CPAs and other tax professionals to make sure that what they're doing is in compliance and all of the other things, and that they're filing their taxes properly. But there's some things that as a business owner you can do that can offset your taxes pretty significantly.
Right. And I love that. I think that there's kind of another transition in mindset with this conversation in just how long you've been in the entrepreneurial game and how much experience you have with the tax code. And what I mean by this is once you really understand the tax code, and I have so much to learn, so I'll just preface it with that. But once you really understand it, I feel like the rules are written on the wall in a sense, because like you said, there are specific things that our government wants us to do, and they will almost incentivize it through tax breaks. So when you look at the different investments you can make, like you said, real estate, which I got to commend you because I feel like a lot of financial advisors will say, no, it's bonds and stocks, and that's where we live.
Right.
That's what we're going to do.
Right.
But I think when you look at like these endowment funds, for example, there's so many different investments and things that you can pour your money into, and then it also plays into getting the tax benefits. And keep me honest, but I feel like the tax code has been written by the wealthy for the wealthy. It's people in Congress, it's people who are running the game who have made those tax codes, and there are specific types of accounts and things that you can do to leverage how far your dollar goes as an entrepreneur. I think there's a couple things that I wanted to ask you about, really, is there's something called a silo account.
Okay.
Have you heard of a silo account?
I don't know the word specifically, but maybe you can help me understand that.
There was a conversation around this where it's instead of running your profits to zero and then not keeping any money and being able to go raise capital as a result, when you can lean into the different types of nuanced structures of your business capital, meaning your money needs to move from one account to another, and it's not like it's going to the Cayman Islands, it's not going offshore, it's like specific types of accounts that you move your money through, and then it's not subject to taxes.
So while I can't speak to that specifically, one of the things that I see a lot on social media and sometimes in sort of these popular applications, like let's just call it social media, they pop in these tidbits like, we did this, like we moved this, and then we these three businesses are all inside this one corporation, and then they flow through this, and then they go, well, that's all well and good, okay, and that might be legal. However, what they're not telling you is what is the cost to do that? And then what are the ramifications for backing that out? So for example, things change over time. And I'll just use estate planning as an example. So back in the early late 90s and early 2000s, the estate tax threshold was very low. It was like $2.5 million. Okay? And then under the Obama administration, I think that's where we got to closer to where we are in modern today, then it got to like $10 million per person. Now we're up to like 20 million. My point is whether those numbers are exact or not, the estate exemption was very low. So what was happening is a lot of these people that had more than $2.5 million in net worth were using different structures. So I've seen this with a lot of like family partnerships, and that's all well and good. Like you build a family partnership, you put assets into it, it hides it from the estate tax situation. But then tax law changed. Now all of a sudden the ceiling goes a lot higher, and maybe that corporation, that family corporation or family partnership, isn't as useful as it was. So now you have to back out of that thing. Okay, well, what's the ramifications? Now there might be a tax hit coming out of that thing, unwinding it. So I have a client, as an example, who put a bunch of properties into an S corp type of situation, and part of it was that he was told that it was going to do all these things. He takes a little bit of a revenue or income off of it as an employee. He's managing these properties, and it's works so far so well. But the reality is that on the back end, with property, if you had him, let's just say, in a trust, you die, then the trust gets the step up in basis, and there's some things there. Well, he's owned some of these houses since the late 70s, early 80s, early 90s. So the appreciation on those houses is significant.
Oh, wow.
But for him to unwind the S corp status of those properties, he can't just pass it on to his kids and his kids get the step up in basis. They're going to inherit his basis. And that's a really big challenge, or can be a really big challenge. And so backing that out, he now has to pay this big tax bill on those properties. And so you start to look at it from that lens, and you're like, okay, all of these structures have their pros and cons. And while the details of that example might not be exactly specific, and there might be some nuances where somebody might argue with me about how that's structured, the reality is that that's generally how it's situated. So when you see, these silo accounts, or you see different ways of structuring it through different corporations, there is both a cost of doing business. So how much did it cost to set that up? And are you working with a professional to make sure that you're doing the right thing? I mean, I see this all the time with investment strategies. People are like, oh, I'm a DIYer, I do this, and I'm in stocks and bonds. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But if somebody, most of the time, and this happened 2 weeks ago, a client comes to me, he's like, Taylor, I'm 42 years old. I've been doing this by myself and I enjoy it. I'm like, great. Kind of tell me about your strategy. Well, I do this and all this. And so we open up his accounts. He shows me, where his stuff is. And there's no rhyme or reason with any of the investments. And he's investing in companies that are tied to his industry that he does. And that's fine, but he couldn't give me some sort of really good way of how he structures his investment strategy. And he was admitting to me, that's not okay with me now. I've now got serious enough that I can't just be, this is not some fly-by-night little operation anymore. I've got to think about this for my family security, for my kids, for my wife, for my legacy, for my business, all of these factors. And so by having a professional looking over your shoulder, you can actually see that you're doing the right things. And so when you're setting up these really complex structures, you probably ought to have somebody that's looking over your shoulder, and what's that going to cost? And does that really make sense for where you are? Now, if you're making $3, $4, $10, $20 million, probably does, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're making a couple $100,000, maybe that's not as beneficial, or even just less than $1 million. Then you probably need to kind of start thinking about it from that perspective. So I don't know if that helps, like with the silo accounts.
It does.
But this idea of building complexity just for the sake of like trying to save a little bit of money, like try to think about what's also the cost of doing that.
Right, and you look at, like, for example, Starbucks. I can't imagine Starbucks has a different LLC for every location that's opened in Delaware.
Right.
And then they have to run taxes on each. It's probably not how those giants are doing it. So I think there's a lot to be said about what we see on Instagram and TikTok on those financial gurus who say, go open your LLC in Delaware and then you won't have to pay taxes on anything.
Right.
So I think it's just, maybe we could dive into that a little bit. There's a lot of talk about what people should be doing or how to structure your business or real estate portfolio, etc.
Yeah.
Would you say there is 1, 2, 3 golden rules in structuring your investments, whether it be, starting new businesses, investing in real estate, stocks, etc.? What would you say are the golden rules for mindful wealth, really, as an entrepreneur?
Well, there's a few things that kind of come to mind, and one of the things that we continually talk to our clients about is start with the end in mind. So when you're starting a venture, what does the end goal look like? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to build it? Do you want to just not have a boss? I mean, that might be it. I just want to have my own autonomy. You don't need to build this thing to $10 billion and have some massive enterprise value and then have some massive exit. Like, that's, for the most part, that's not most people's objective. They want to be kind of their own boss. So start with the end in mind. That's kind of what I always think of. And that's whether you're starting a business or investing. You know, when I talk to a lot of clients, they are so focused on retirement that they kind of lose sight of some of the other things that are going on. So they're saving so much to their 401ks or to their SEP IRAs or whatever the vehicle might be, and they didn't take a time to think about, oh, what's this really do for us? And if we played that game where we go 20, 30 years down the road and look at our lives at 60 or 65 and say, well, what does our net worth look like from just a structure standpoint? So that's kind of that first thing, is like, think about the other things that are going into it when you're getting started. Another thing that I think about when people are kind of building their wealth is be cautiously optimistic. I talk about this with investment management all the time, and it was something that I came to probably in 2012 or 2013. I was now, had been in the business a couple years. I was starting to getting a little bit of understanding of kind of what I was really doing. Had some more experience. I wasn't just wet behind the ears at this point. And I realized that people had just experienced the global financial crisis, right? The GFC was fresh in their mind. And they kept turning to me and saying, when are we going to see the next shoe to drop? Like, when are we going to see this thing, like, break apart? Nobody had any confidence in the market because they just lost 50% of their net worth. And now they want to, now they're trying to get back in the market, or maybe they're in the market, but they're just super gun shy and they're just overly cautious. And so I started using this term cautiously optimistic. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, when we think about that, what does that mean? Well, think about the upside. So being the optimist, like, do you need growth? You think about those things. But the cautious part is, what could go wrong? And this is not like the sky is falling type of moment. It's, are we protected? Are we doing the right things? Are we, what's kind of known knowns? So, for example, a client might come to me and they want to invest in a private placement, sort of, either that's a fund or, a friend's company. My thought to them is, well, how much do we have a known? Let's say they want to put $25,000, and they said, okay, well, what does life look like if you lose that $25,000? Does that change what you eat for dinner? Mm-hmm. And I use that term a lot because I think when people put it in that perspective, they're like, oh, okay, well if I know that I might lose $25,000, then I might change how I do the investment.
Right.
If it doesn't have a huge bearing, and they're like, yeah, I know that I'm taking that risk, and if it goes down to zero, well, shit, I learned something new. If it goes up to 250,000, great. That's a great investment, and it worked out really well.
Right.
But know what you know, and then have that cautious optimism. And another thing, I guess, that I look at is just thinking about things in different tranches of time frames. So long term, like put yourself at 60. You're a 30-something, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So what does 30 years down the road look like? Okay, well, what does 10 years down the road look like? We were talking at the beginning, I was thinking about my business in 10 years. My daughter's 7 years old. And it shocked me because I can think about my business in 10 years and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to have this revenue and this assets under management and these many clients. And then it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh. And my daughter will be graduating high school. And I was like, and I'll be on the eve of my 50th birthday.
Oh gosh.
And I was like, whoa, that puts in, but still having that game, playing that game in your head and seeing, okay, now I can see myself in that, in that person, because guess what? You're probably going to make wiser decisions if you can put yourself there. And today's Taylor can be proud of the decisions that I make when I'm 50 about the decisions that I made when I was 40.
Amen. I love that. I think there's so much clarity that would come from that, because you'll be more present in what you're doing today, whether it's your business or your family.
Yep.
I think there's so much there. Let's talk about family, because you
Okay.
have a beautiful family. You have
Thank
3
you.
little ones.
Yep.
2 girls, 1 baby boy.
Mhm.
Not so baby anymore. He's 3.
Yeah, 7,
Oh
5,
my
and 3.
gosh, 7, 5, and 3. So what I think, taking that leap when you left the old firm that you were working with,
Yep.
and you decided, like, you went home and you're like, okay, babe, it's time.
Yep.
I'm gonna take the leap. I'm gonna jump. Talk me through the experience of branching off, doing your own thing when you have a family
Yeah.
leaning on you.
So this was something that wasn't just an overnight thing, and something that I've seen with a lot of other entrepreneurs that I'm really proud of the work that they do, but also something that is reinforced by the conversations that we have, is that seed didn't just start 6 months before.
Mm-hmm.
The seed of entrepreneurship sat in my stomach for years, and I it's actually kind of cool. I get to go. There's like these files that I have in like an old file that were from like 2014, 2015, where I actually mapped out like what a business could look like.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that's kind of like, but it was like so rudimentary. It was like, I need to be at this, and this is like, these are some rough projections. And so I think about that, like at some level, that was on my heart then.
Yeah.
So you let that kind of build, and there are certain things that happen, there are inflection points. But when I got to the point of 2020, I was like, all right, there was a moment that there was like, okay, there's no looking back. Like, I gotta do this.
Yeah.
And I talked to my wife so much about it that she knew it was inevitable. It was something that was going to happen. And I had done some interviews with other firms that were, I would say called the safe play, go work for somebody. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I wasn't going to be proud of myself if I just left and went to another firm. And I said, you know what, I got to do it. Because guess what? Those other firms, they're going to be out there. So from that standpoint, the conversations that I had with my wife was to say, okay, well, what are some things that we can do to ensure that we have, that, first of all, she has the confidence in me. Because if she's second guessing me, then gosh, and really what it took one.
Right.
It took one person to have some faith in myself, and it was my wife. And having that was like so big that she's like, go do it, I trust you. And you're like, okay. Because this was all fun and games when I'm writing it on a spreadsheet and doing the business plan. Now somebody's like, yeah, go do it. Kind of dare you. Like, let's see.
Dare you.
Yeah. Like, come on. And you're like, oh no. Like, I got to actually go do this thing. So the support of Steph, my wife, was huge from that. But we had the financial situation in order. Now, it's really helpful, and I've talked to other male entrepreneurs that maybe didn't have the 2-income situation. Now, I had a wife that has a great job, but I also had 2 children at home. We didn't have our third at that point, and there was some concern. We had a 6-month-old at home, and I'm leaving my somewhat safe job. And what I looked at is, well, what is safe?
Ooh.
Because a few years before that same firm that I was working for surprised everybody and said, because of some stuff that happened, we got to close our business. Whoa, what a shock. And there's something in corporate culture that I really don't like, which is when somebody calls the culture family. Because guess what? If the balance sheet, if the budget doesn't work, they're going to do some downgrading. They're going to cut some people. And that's not family. You're on a team. Let's call it what it is. So I saw that. I was it was really early on in the first pregnancy, and I was like very vocal. I was like, you guys are going to quit on us like this? Like, that's crazy. You're going to shut the business? And fortunately, they were able to do some stuff where they kept the business alive. But it shocked me to my core. Like, it shook me.
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, I thought this was a really stable business. I thought this was a great company. Like, what is going on? And now they're going to close their doors, and I've got to I've got my first child going to be born here in the next couple of months. Like, holy moly, like I can't believe this is happening. So when you think about it, like, what is safety? There's no assurances in that. And so you start to think about risk in that, and it changed my perspective on risk. And so when I made that leap to start my own firm, I knew what my runway looked like. And then I stress tested my own business. What is the bare minimum that I need to accomplish to ensure that my business runs okay?
Right.
And if I could succeed in that, just small endeavor, and it was low. I didn't have to do much. But I was like, you know what? At least I know what that looks like versus being surprised by it. So how do we remove surprises? And so when I made that leap, yeah, there were some things, and then there was some weird personal stuff that happened between myself and the business, the former business, and I'm getting chased down by some stuff, and it was not fun. But guess what? There wasn't the financial concern that it was before, because I had done the things, I'd done my homework, and I'd done some things that were really helpful to make sure that I had a runway. And within the first 8 weeks, anything that I borrowed from myself, I paid back.
Okay.
And it was like, oh my gosh, this is real. And so when somebody says like, how's it going? I'm like, this is the greatest thing that I've ever done.
That's amazing.
And I professionally, obviously I've got
Right.
3 kids, but the other thing is that now it's really fun because I know that my children are watching. And what does dad do? And what does mom do? And so we happen to be a household of somewhat entrepreneurial people. And I know that that's going to be a really cool lesson for them at some point in their life that they get to experience. And I'm just not sure how that's going to impact them, but I know it will.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's families of creators and there's families of contributors, and I think they intertwine, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that watching you
Yeah.
is going to be their greatest example. I wouldn't be surprised if they grow up to have this entrepreneurial spirit as well.
Yeah, you hope so, and
Yeah.
you do what you can with what you got, and as parents, I know you probably experience this, but you try to do as much as you can to educate them at whatever level their ability to understand is, and hopefully you just lead by example. And one of the things that probably intimately is how smart these little kids can be, and that they can understand, and they can read, and they can see the situation, and they can then apply that to themselves. And it's really cool.
It is really cool.
Yeah.
We were just talking before we started. You were the mystery reader at your daughter's school.
I was the mystery reader today, so I got to surprise my daughter at her 2nd grade class and read to all the students, and it was really cool. It was really fun.
I love that. I feel like that's one of the big reasons I got into entrepreneurship, is so that I can have the flexibility to do things like that,
Yeah.
to be the room mom and then go to the studio, and
Totally.
just be able to have that dynamic lifestyle where you're not only building something for you and your family,
Yep.
but you're present and you're there.
Totally. This is such a cool story. I have a client, we had touched base, several years ago, and she had reached out in some capacity, or somehow we got connected, and she was very interested. I think she had just turned 40. So there was this weird moment for her where she was like, I'm turning 40, like, I need to get my financial life in order. Now is the time to grow up. And we were laughing. And then she went radio silent.
Oh,
And I was like, that happens. People maybe were not a good fit. So about 6-8 months later, I sent her several emails, and then finally, I gave her some space. And then, 6-8 months goes by, reached out to her again, and she immediately got back to me. Taylor, yes, I thank you for your persistence. Thank you for reaching out. My life is crazy. I work 80 hours a week. She has 2
wow.
kids. She was corporate America mom. She was doing so much. She was stressed out about, and then all of a sudden, guess what? Financial planning, all investments, all of that retirement planning fell to the bottom. And she was just like, I'm thinking we're doing everything right, but let's start it. So we started the process back up. So we got everything going. And then we go to the implementation process. Again, she'll go radio silent. She'll do this, and it was just hard, like because she was just so busy, and she, her husband was busy. All of life was just happening,
right?
And we were going through the process, and she was having a hard time even sending me like statements and stuff like that to be able to allow me to do my job with her. And I say that because then we had this amazing meeting late last year, and she goes, I think I'm going to leave my firm, my company. I was like, okay, well, what are you going to do? She's like, I'm going to start a consulting business. I'm going to start my own thing. And I was like, that's amazing. And we had this great conversation around that, and all these cool things. So it was so cool to be able to have that experience. And again, all my stuff is just whatever. It doesn't really matter that she does. But I could just sense in her that she didn't have time to go pick up the kids after school. She didn't have time to do the midday event at school. She didn't have time to be mystery reader or the class mom or do any of that stuff. And I knew that was kind of something that was eating her alive a little bit. She mentioned it, and so fast forward, she left her corporate world, started her own thing. We had some meetings in the last little bit, and then she posted something on her social media, on her LinkedIn, and it was her walking her kids to school, and it was the four family members, her husband, the 2 kids, and herself. And she goes, this is what entrepreneurship is all about. And I was like, that is so cool, because 6 weeks before, she was working 80 hours a week.
Yep.
Now she can take her kids, walk them to school, and walk home to get on the 9 o'clock Zoom to still do a job that she's going to be ultra successful at, and get to do and instead of, but I have to travel this week, or I can't make it this week because I have a really important presentation, or an executive's in town and I've got to host them and I've got to miss your recital. These are things that so many people miss out on. And in entrepreneurship, it's not that you're working less hard. You just have more control of how you work. And that's been such a cool thing to be, from my perspective. I get to do the things that I want to do with my family and support them. And my clients get to do a lot of the same things. And it's really cool to be, it's inspiring, really.
It is inspiring. That story is it resonates so much with me, because that was me.
Yeah.
And when I was working in corporate, I was there for 4 years, and I had my first son, and he was going to daycare, early morning till the afternoon, and then I'd pick him up, and then he'd be awake with me for 2 hours, and then he'd go to bed. Then I'd travel. And I remember there was one specific time where I had a huge presentation coming up in Utah or something. So I went to work early for the first 2 days, Monday, Tuesday. I barely saw him. By the time I got home, he was asleep. And then I left early in the morning to go on my trip.
Right.
I didn't see him for 4 days.
Right.
And it was so, at that point, I think I was still nursing. So it was so hard. And I think any mom listening probably could attest to that. But I think there's something that goes off in your mind when it becomes bigger than you.
Yeah.
And you have a huge why pushing you and fanning your flames to go pursue that thing and just see, maybe it will work. Maybe it's that time.
Yep.
And then 5 years pass by and you look back and you're like, this is what I prayed for once upon a time.
Right.
And here we are. So I think, what are some words of advice that we could give some of the listeners who are maybe at that transition? I think there's, it's scary. There's a lot of risk, walking away from a steady income. But I think there's such an upside. And when you are cautiously optimistic, when it comes to starting your business, there's so much that can flourish in your life.
Yeah. The couple things to kind of that I've learned along the way is, do the work. So if you're going to go start your own thing and you're going to go, be an entrepreneur, do the work to be prepared for it, because it is hard work. There's no shortcuts. So build the business plan. Don't make the shortcuts, because that stuff is going to just pay you back exponentially and be very rewarding when you need it. Right? You go do a SWOT report. Oh, that's kind of stupid. That's what we did in school, business school. Like, I don't even know what a SWOT report is. And then you're like, oh, but now I can kind of see where my strengths are. Where's my weaknesses? Where's my opportunities? What are my threats? Like, what are these things? And you start to look at it and you're like, oh, that was one little practice. So do the work. Another thing is you're just having that mindset of growth. That there are so many amazing opportunities. Something that I always lean on is, my dad would say this: there's a million ways to make $1 million. And you start to think about it, and there's so many cool businesses out there. And I think there's so many, our society has done this really unfortunate thing, probably going back to the 90s and 2000s, is that you got to go to college, right? Mm-hmm. I've got several people that have started electric businesses. They've started plumbing businesses. They've started these more blue collar types of jobs, and they make an unbelievable amount of money. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there is so many opportunities out there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the white collar in the big building kind of type, in the office type of business. And you don't necessarily need to have all the education, and you don't need to have all the answers. That's another thing. There's going to be a gap. There's always going to be a gap. And that gap is the risk. So there's what you know now, and there's the future. And then there's the gap. And if you can have the wherewithal to have the plan in place, do all of the things, go through the effort, put it in place, take the steps, do all the things, right? You can fight through that gap, and you can overcome the gap. But that gap is a risk. There's no doubt about it. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that gap. Mm-hmm. And they get to the edge, and then they back away. I'm not ready. Maybe next month. Well, if there was ever a perfect time, you would never do it. You might have just had a kid. You might have had a second kid. Shit, in our situation, you might have had a third kid. But the reality is that you've got to have a growth mindset. And if you have that, there's going to be opportunities that present themselves.
Absolutely. I am so grateful that you came here with us today, Taylor. I think there's some huge golden nuggets that I think our listeners are going to walk away with.
I hope so, yeah.
So thank you for joining us. Where can people find more about you?
Yes, so I'm on your typical social channels, Instagram, Facebook. You can find either 4 Points Wealth Management or T. Leary or Taylor Leary. Also very active on LinkedIn, so Taylor Leary on there as well. And I try to produce as much content, blogs, articles, and posts as much as I can. You can also find us on the website, 4pointswealth.com.
Beautiful. We'll link that in the show notes. I appreciate it, Taylor. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll catch you next time.
Appreciate it.
Remember this as you go about your day today. The ideas that are on your heart for a reason. Do not ignore them. Tune into them. Tap in, lean in, understand them, and pursue them. If not you, then who? If this episode was helpful to you in any way, please like, share, comment, subscribe. It does wonders for our efforts, and it helps us to continue our mission of inspiring entrepreneurs and giving them the resources and the perspective we all need to take it to the next level. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Paresa Noble, and we'll catch you next time.